On October 2nd, 1924, Wyoming Governor William Ross died from complications following an appendectomy. His wife, Nellie, of 22 years, was understandably distraught. Her brother, George, came up from Tennessee for the funeral and said that she couldn't stop talking about old times, and when she gets on to the past, it is terrible for her, and I assure you, hard on the listener. She was still in the governor's mansion when the chairman of the state Democratic Party came to ask her a delicate question. Would she consider running for the governorship in the special election, less than a month away? Nellie Tayloe Ross would shortly become the first woman governor of a U.S. state. And what followed was even more interesting than that. It is history that deserves to be remembered. Nellie Tayloe Ross was born Nellie Davis Tayloe to James Tayloe and Elizabeth Green in St. Joseph, Missouri in 1876. Both families had been wealthy plantation owners whose fortunes turned after the Civil War. She graduated from high school in Miltonville, Kansas, moved with her family to Omaha, Nebraska. She attended a teaching school there and taught kindergarten for a few years. She met William Ross while visiting family in Tennessee and married him in 1902. With William, she moved to Cheyenne, Wyoming, where he sought to establish a law practice and repeatedly ran and lost elections for political office. Running as a progressive and a supporter of prohibition, he was finally elected governor of Wyoming in 1922. He often consulted with Nellie on political questions, and she gave her husband steadfast support, even though the meager salary, his debts, and her own taste for socializing meant that the family struggled financially. He died after only a year and a half in office. Many people, including her brother George, discouraged her from running. Women had only had the right to vote for 4 years, and ambition on the part of a woman was viewed rather poorly. Even so, her brother wrote to his wife, no one ever wanted the governorship more. She may also have had financial concerns. She needed the money to maintain herself and the kids, and William left little to her other than a home in Cheyenne. The state Republicans nominated Eugene Sullivan, who had an unfortunate connection to the recent Teapot Dome scandal. Nellie only agreed to run 45 minutes before accepting the nomination. Her acceptance, published around the state, said that she would expect and feel in duty bound to make her own decisions, but that she would not have accepted the nomination had not my familiarity with and interest in my husband's work given me an understanding of the problems of the office. Ross refused to campaign. She was elected on November 4th, 1924, by a margin larger than her husband's of 3 years earlier. She was inaugurated on January 5th, 1925. Despite her silence during the campaign, Ross didn't plan on being a figurehead. Ross refused to be silenced when she had won the election. Because the Wyoming legislature only met once every other year, she would only have one chance to push legislation. In addition to supporting her husband's progressive policies, including tax cuts and banking reform, she presented 8 of her own policies, including earmarking state funds for school districts and better safety regulations for coal miners. The legislature was mostly Republican and supported only 5 of her 11 proposals. After the legislature adjourned, Ross found herself nationally famous. She accepted an invitation to speak at the Women's National Democratic Club in D.C., where she attended the inauguration of President Calvin Coolidge. She later wrote that the audience seemed favorably impressed that she had remained feminine despite the office. I do not represent the overpowering, masculine, militant type of politician that violates their sense of what the Lord intended a woman should be, as she put it. A difficult line she had to walk. She spoke at the Women's World Fair in Chicago and the National Governors Conference in Maine. She wrote her brother that year that she gained confidence in herself and her ability to do the job that she'd been elected to. Something entirely new seems to have been given me, she said. She was renominated to run for governor for the 1926 election, but unlike the last time, faced significant resistance. Before her election, a newspaper had asked her if she planned to appoint any men to office, apparently worried that she would substitute all men for women. By 1926, it was clear that she did not intend to replace all men, but women were more concerned that she hadn't appointed enough women. She maintained throughout the campaign that women should not vote for her solely because of her gender. She toured the state and gave speeches that year, proving herself a competent orator and giving 6 or 7 speeches a day when the weather was good. She only appealed to her gender in the last month before the election, claiming that if she were defeated, it would look like the first woman governor had been a failure. I appeal to you not to place me in a false light before the nation, she said. But she lost. Her election was remarkably close. She lost by only 2% of the vote. Later, Ross wrote that cultivating a woman's following, as she failed to do, would have been entirely proper, and, I believe, effective enough to have changed the result of the election. She spent the next few years being active in Democratic politics across the nation. She moved to D.C. to direct the Women's Division of the National Democratic Committee, directing the campaign for women's votes in the election of Franklin Delano Roosevelt in 1932. When Roosevelt became president in 1933, he appointed Ross as the director of the Bureau of the Mint. Ross would later call the appointment a surprise. It all sounded so cold, dealing with metal. She was the first woman to hold the position, and one of very few to hold a government office so high at the time. One reason for appointment could have been the state of the mint in 1933. The ongoing depression meant the demand for coins was at an all-time low. In 1929, 277 million pennies had been struck. In 1931, just 24 million, a decrease of over 90%. No quarters were issued at all in 1931 or 1933, and possibly the only reason any were minted in 1932 was to display the new design in honor of the bicentennial of Washington's birth. One reporter speculated the job was so minimal at that point that even a woman could do it. For a brief time after her appointment, Ross clashed with her assistant director, Margaret OReilly, who had served in that post since 1924. Mint directors were often political appointees who had no interest or experience with the mint. Riley had, for much of the previous 10 years, essentially run the mint. She was acting director when Ross was appointed. Though she was known as the sweetheart of the Treasury, Ross's personal secretary, Edna Wilkins, described her as ruthless. But the two ended up working together closely. Ross's son Bradford would say that she recognized people who had great ability. She tried to surround herself with people that were capable, so she could do a good job. O'Reilly was nothing if not deeply intimate with the workings of the mint, and up until her retirement in 1938, the two worked together well. Though the mint may have seemed like a trivial job when she was posted, it would play an integral part of Roosevelt's policies. Coin mintage increased 72% from 1933 to 1934, despite a staff increase of only 13%. Roosevelt signed Executive Order 6102 in April of 1933, which nationalized the nation's gold supply, recalled all Americans deliver all gold bullion, certificates, or coin with an aggregate value of over $100 to the Federal Reserve in exchange for $20.67 per troy ounce. The order was meant to shore up the country's gold supplies while solving the issue of citizens hoarding it in place of American dollars. In December of 1933, he also nationalized the nation's silver. The mint had to figure out how to store all this incoming metal. Under Ross, the mint underwent the largest facility expansion in its history, replacing the old mint in San Francisco, building a new wing of the Denver Mint, new vaults in Philadelphia, a silver bullion depository at West Point, and the gold depository at Fort Knox. Ross had a poor working relationship with Roosevelt's Treasury Secretary, Henry Morgenthau, who went out of his way not to work with her directly, didn't invite her to department meetings, and mocked her to his staff. She received a raise in 1938 only because a Wyoming senator specifically asked for it as a favor. Storage was not the only issue for the mint. In 1934, it took in over $1 billion worth of metal, more than double what they had the previous year, and it needed protection. In her frequent touring of mint properties, she found the security was woefully poor. The guards were often men from the mints who were near retirement age, and little or no training, and held outdated firearms. She oversaw a complete overhaul of mint security, putting in new timed locks, increasing guard coverage, and a new security training program. She also supervised the creation of the Jefferson Nickel. The buffalo nickel was disliked in the mint because the dies were prone to excessive breakage. They often struck indistinctly, and the dates easily wore away in circulation. The mint held an open competition for the new design, although they stipulated the obverse be of Jefferson and the reverse his home, Monticello. Director Ross served as one of the judges. They chose the design of German-born artist Felix Schlag, with some adjustments. By 1941, she had overseen a 350% increase in staffing. She had modernized the production, storage, and protection of coins, and she was blowing away all mint production records. In the 1940-41 fiscal year, the mint produced more coins than any other year in mint history. Then came the war. Demand for coins grew throughout the war, and the mint produced billions of coins for Allied countries around the world who had lost their mints or turned their factories to the war effort. The mint also had to deal with metal shortages. Ross had to cut back on penny production to preserve their meager stores of copper, but by 1942 the shortage was still dire. Nellie herself proposed to Congress the idea of pennies made of zinc-coated steel. While the wartime pennies are today popular collectibles, the public hated them. They were easily mistaken for dimes, and vending machines caught them with magnets meant to stop steel slugs. Even FDR sent a complaint about the pennies to Secretary Morgenthau, who told Ross, "We've got to stop making those new pennies. I can't take any more complaints about them." They soon returned to making copper pennies, thanks to the military promising the mint spent copper cartridges. "That awful war penny almost ruined our reputation," Ross later said, "but nobody disliked it more than we did at the mint." Her time at the mint proved that she was a competent administrator with an eye for details. She instituted a process of filtering air, water, and even burning worn work clothes to recover metal shavings, something she reported saved the mint $100,000 annually. She instituted a program to solicit ideas from her employees, and in 1952, 25 innovations were said to have saved the mint $720,000. Innovations included the mechanization of the melting and rolling process at the Denver Mint, which resulted in a 30% productivity increase, and a new water-cooled mold in Philadelphia that reduced melting costs by 23%. Nellie prided herself in frugality, returning unspent funds to the Treasury, including $2 million in 1948, which drew praise from members of Congress. She was popular among Mint employees, who said she made them feel that they were part of a family. One employee wrote that, "I really do not know where could be found a more efficient and capable leader, and a more respected and loved director than yourself." Another said that the work accomplished by this office could never have been done without your kind of counsel and advice. While guiding the Mint through a historic period of expansion and modernization, she remained active in Democratic politics where she could and gave speeches across the country. She retired from the Mint after 4 terms in 1953. She traveled broadly around the world afterward and wrote for various magazines. Her last trip to Wyoming was in May of 1972, when she attended the centennial celebration of the creation of Yellowstone National Park. Today, Nellie Tayloe Ross is mostly remembered as being the first woman governor in the United States, but she was so much more than just a first. Her work at the Mint was truly transformative. She helped to greatly expand operations and modernize the entire bureau. She served as director of the Mint for 20 years in a period that spanned the Great Depression, the Second World War, and the Korean War, and she got very few complaints with the exception of those hated steel pennies. But despite her public success, she always maintained that the greatest fulfillment for a woman was in motherhood and family. In interviews and descriptions, they would often take the time to say that she had maintained throughout her womanliness. And yet she never could have accomplished all that she did if she didn't believe in herself. "Naturally, it may be asked whether I felt within myself the ability to fill this position," she wrote. "I hope it does not suggest egotism when I reply that not for one moment did I doubt it." Among the new coins that were designed and minted during her tenure is one of my very favorites, the Benjamin Franklin $50. Nellie Tayloe Ross died after suffering a fall at her home in December 1977, at the age of 101. At the time, she was the oldest living ex-governor in the nation.